So then we are back with more understanding from the time of the Second Tabernacle services refined in the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end, then period Shiahu the prophet that was rejected, the prophet that was then sawn in half, the prophet that did speak regarding the time of the completion of the spring feast and also the autumn feast and also the returning of the cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries. So then from this person there was absolutely a rejected person from his time. We are absolutely precisely studying his writings because we find lots of information regarding until the time of the end. Not only we find then the answers of the spring feast, autumn feast, and also the restoration period of the holy cities, but also the entire section related with the combat of the time of the end described in details. So then these recordings are extremely important, and then most importantly, when studying these documents, we find ourselves then understanding the holy schedule. So let's understand then the way the Creator works. Obviously, during this time where so many people are ignorant of His holy instructions, and so many thousands upon thousands of people they are not aware of His holy instructions are then absolutely active, and there was simply then a completion from the first and second tabernacle services. We find ourselves then understanding the way He works. So let's evaluate the time of Gideon in Judges and also Iona when he was in the great fish or then the whale. Let's understand the way it works because we have to then remove the takanot and masim from the instructions, so then we can find ourselves studying these documents precisely and then gleaning the most of them, so then we can become wise when we talk of the time of the end and also what to believe and what not. So then firstly, we find ourselves transitioning from the time of the 1,000 years of deceit. The 1,000 years of deceit then is subdivided by a couple of time periods. We find then the first 800 years was then related with England. Thus then the first beast. The beast also has the understanding of, obviously, during the time where then the holy instructions were then scoundrelized or changed. Understandable. But speaking of the precise understanding of the 1,000 years of deceit, you have to understand then 1,000 years. During these 1,000 years, you find the beast subdividing itself in couple of periods. 800, where you find then England was most prominent during this time, and then a couple hundred years where then America became prominent. If you combine them both, you find then 1,000 years, roughly 1,000. Then we find ourselves then back on the instructions. We find ourselves during the time of the dragon, because the 1,000 years of deceit were then the devilish times. And the time of the dragon speaks of precision. That's why then we find computers, you find trade in computers, high knowledge and trade at the same time. So what we used to know as then a system, a single system, where then the rest of the understandings of the scripture were then mixed with politics and religion. during this time is always a dual understanding. We have to understand then tabernacling and understanding trade. We have to understand Ezekiel 37 and at the same time the way it works during this period of the dragon before he becomes the destroyer. So then during this time where nations are then adapting themselves and then obviously being prepared for the great system, we must then understand the great news of the time of this end. So then not only this, but then nations are then being included with the new system prior of its starting. So if you read, for instance, the visit of the Chinese delegations around the world, you find some of the nomenclatures or words used, they are already related with the new system. Sometimes you find politicians speaking of transactions. You find then politicians speaking of links or linking up. Those are literal nomenclatures related with the time of the computerized trade. So then, when people they get stuck in their grandiosity based from a single system, then they truly have a hard time understanding the dual understanding of it. It's always camouflaged. Some time ago, we began our quest understanding there is then the Chinese yuan, for instance. They have the paper money. They have a central bank of their own, and they have regulation. That's an understanding. They also have the dual understanding related with the virtual. If you want to understand this system, try to combine the Bitcoin system, where then the US unfortunately made a wrong decision of placing a hold on it, because we sent then a signal to the Asians where we are not prepared. A mature decision would be an adaptation of this Bitcoin system with the government. But rather the government chose the path of control. But it's a control based upon a single understanding only. So then when you in your mind understand a system where you have a central bank, government regulation, and paper money, USD, then you have an understanding. The virtual system, you must combine the Bitcoin with it. Not saying precisely you have to use the Bitcoin. It's an understanding of it. Would be similar of coming up with USDV, or the virtual money system of USD, but not under the control of the government or banking. And then having our industry backing it up. And the value of the USDV would be obviously the average price of the Chinese gold market. So then we have a constantly. So then people can start purchasing the USDV and being prepared for the new system. So far, unfortunately, our government is not very smart. They are working in such a way where they are spending 4 times more than they are earning, and there is no USDV compensator for the inflation shortly coming. However, the Chinese are very smart. They are doing their dealings for so long, and both of them are camouflaged. They are so smart, so many of us don't even understand this much. So when we come up with a system where then we have USDV as a compensator, backed up by production and the average gold price of China, then we would be heading in the proper direction. But let's then understand, besides these, the military implications of this situation. Let's be very honest, our military at the moment is not very smart. Because the analogy is this: if the government has a single understanding of a system, the military is obviously simultaneously working with the same single system. It's the nature of these single understanding. They can't think otherwise because the government and the military always join up in simultaneously making decisions. So when there is only a single system, there is always this control freak desire of always being on top. These causes trouble because then not understanding the trade of the end, where we must combine a virtual monetary market and trade at the same time, then we find ourselves always trying for control and never able to obtain. So then let's understand then the warfare after the downloading of the system, because it's coming. If you read the news, when China makes headlines, you can always find nomenclature of computer trade mixed up with the words in politics. You find then linking up, you find then transactions. Those are then the normal wordings of the new system. Not only this, but we understand China has a vast amounts of raw materials stocked up. Not only this, but then they started the BRICS system. They have their own banking. It is obviously both of them at the same time. Not only this, but besides of having raw materials stocked up, then they made other deals with the Asian countries, then securing even further the raw materials via mining. Then they went to Africa. CMC company, obviously the largest of China, also backing up more raw materials. And then you find then the submarines at liberty of going underwater anywhere in the world, international waters. So these are indicators of the new system, plus a very unique system of warfare. When we think of warfare from a single-minded understanding, it's always control via power. Brute force and control. The reason why this understanding is solid is because the government went against the Bitcoin system. They used brute force against a system precisely what's coming in the future, and we don't know how to deal with it. So let's say, for instance, the government went against the Bitcoin, understandably. Sections of it is on hold. But then, friends around the world, they can simply send what they have via another system, also electronic, and then from another country they can do the transfer for them. It is available in the system anyway. So there is no way of placing the system under control, because this system is then taken over the world. Thus then the time of the trade of the end. So let's understand it from the military viewpoint. The Creator always worked in a very unique ways. For instance, it was mentioned regarding then Gideon. There was confusion on the camp. Then regarding Iona. Then regarding Egypt, those 10 plagues, they never had taken place. Those were set of dreams only. How do we know this? Because then when you find the original manuscripts, then the Pharaoh realized he was deceived. Obviously, he couldn't have enough strength in his country then to muster an army. Can you imagine? The captains and so on and so forth trying to muster an army with their families busted and firstborn dead. Can you imagine then the confusion going on and then mustering an army with such a devastation is ridiculous. So those were only a set of dreams, and then later Pharaoh felt deceived. But during his dreams it was very real. Gideon, for instance, in those pots that were broken. So because of the lack of knowledge of during this time of the restoration period, prior of the starting of the autumn feast, how would the Creator deal with the situation knowing that vast number of the people, they have no idea who He is and His holy instructions are yet active? It's via confusion. It's the same way He worked before. So then, when we face ourselves before China, what can you expect as far as warfare? It's warfare of interference. We are thinking so big of control of the internet, control of cyber security, and control of these, then the other, and then control the number of flat tops they are producing, and then aircraft and so on and so forth, and highly specialized system and weapons and ICBMs. But we are thinking of brute control. When you include the dual camouflaged virtual system of the trade, then you understand the interference part of it. When the system becomes available, obviously the signal coming from space is a special signal. But then you find submarines going around the world under the water. And those submarines, they are not big deal. They are standard submarines, and honestly, they are very inexpensive. We are not talking about the Red October unit, from the movie. Atomic submarine with a complicated system. We are speaking of simplicity. But then this simplicity is, in quote, complicated via a system where then it's used interfering equipment. So then, understandably, you'll find the most important and stealth system ever produced. Interference. Then not only this, the great advantage of working with interference is then you don't have to have a big port. You don't have to have a submarine bunker. You don't have to have great facilities. You only have to have, obviously, the liberty of going under the water, docking at some port anywhere in the world where there is a simple, regular trading dock. Replenishment of regular provisions, stores, and fuel. And then what you may think is a shack up there watching from the space, you'll find that is an interference shack. So you have then satellites around the planet, and some of them are disguised as either television or some sort of a scientific equipment for survey of storms and such. Understandably, those are activated via those submarines when they are on patrols. But not at the moment, because there is no usage for it. But when the system becomes available, then it's crucial. But we were so used to work with brute force, forcing people, forcing our way, and control these, then you're always single-minded. and we don't understand the future. So when the system becomes available, then you can understand very easily submarines going around the world and producing interference. How are you going to prove that all submarines are causing interference? No, you have a problem in your equipment. It's the most frustrating area of any kind of a warfare, because they do not use brute force. They don't use complicated equipment. So then how could we combine the trade of the end, obviously virtual, and obviously won't be camouflaged anymore? Couple situations, then USDV, and then understanding interference as then the new warfare system. So the understanding comes then obviously during the time of the Second World War. The Japanese, they were very cheap. They used to do the most simplistic way of doing warfare, but they were very fierce. So it is very popular amongst the Asians of being simple. But then because of our grandiosity, brute force, we have neglected scoundrelly and very badly this interference in system. And if you do a research in the computer, you'll find so many equipment is in orbit. It is amazing the amount of them. So let's say, for instance, you began to watch the news, and some places, for instance, in New Zealand, some time ago, they are upgrading their logs in order to get, on a positive when the system comes. Such a large system worldwide, if you are behind this new system, and if you talk big as far as control, brute force, and then ICBMs, you find in complicated systems, this would scare the rest of the world. You don't work with those kinds. But the stealth part of it, you work with interference. So such a large system coming in the future, obviously they are working with an interference part of warfare, because it does not cause alarm. So then when you find those beams from space coming to the Earth and covering a certain area, you can be sure of it. Those submarines, they are linked up with it. As it goes over the Earth, depending on what's going on, obviously they're going to have a blackout. It's not destructive, but it causes interference. So a simple submarine, for instance, a size where 20 or 30 people would be the very most. On patrols, standard submarine, inconspicuous. When the time comes, surfaces in any port doing trade with China, and wait for the proper time. But at the moment, the most important is coming up with the USDV. So people can start doing their transfers and make sure our industry then is able to back up the new system and becoming partners of the new era of the trade of the end. So based from the holy schedule and from what was done in the past, you can be sure of it, 100% interference is going to be the warfare of the future. So it's up to us then, using brute force and ignorant, or being smart and combining the virtual system with our very own, and then backing up with production. It's the only way of becoming partners. Because we are spending more, 4 times that we are earning. And that's very dangerous. And the holding of the Bitcoin has sent a signal giving an absolutely clear understanding we are not prepared, because we would expect an adaptation rather than a holding.